All right. One thing I always kind of wanted to do was make a tier list. I feel like it's kind of a rite of passage for people on YouTube. So, you know, I feel like it would be kind of fun. In case you haven't read the title, this tier list is going to be for IDs for Railway 1, Refraction Railway 1 Madness. And it's going to be for pretty much, it's going to be for optimized play, focused. Because, I feel like a bunch of other tier lists, I haven't watched, any of them, but, I feel like a bunch of other tier lists tend to focus on, just general play, like getting under that 120. But, I feel like I kind of want to put a little bit of a more competitive swing into it, for my tier list, just so I'm not parroting the same thing as other people, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing more on optimized play, because that's kind of what I am most familiar with. I just recently got a pretty good low turn run post patch, and I've really taken the time, especially since I made those other guides over the past over a week ago, I think. I've really grown very, very comfortable with all of the fights in Railway, and I'll tell you, some of them I've grown more appreciative to. Some of them I've learned to. I didn't think they were bad at first, just playing it more casually, but once you start really grinding out for lower turns, they get really annoying. But yeah, so I'm just gonna be making a tier list of, just in case you're curious. When I think about more competitive, a more competitive railway runner, I'm thinking usually a low turn kind of starts around 80-ish, sub 80, is what I'm considering, because that's when you really have to start paying attention to meta units, what you're bringing to each stage. You can't really just brainlessly kind of just pick things that kind of match up. Usually it would work anyway, but you have to really start learning how the stages individually work, more than just type and resistance matchups, and then bringing the trifecta to every stage, which doesn't really change obviously, but you gotta evolve your gameplay a little bit more. So when I think of when low turn, the tier list is going to be based around their performance and more optimized play. And I think it's going to be interesting because even though Railway has been out for so long, it's still not a solved meta. There's still things that I'm trying with every run. I'm trying something different, and I'm getting results that are different but good. So I haven't even personally tried all of the IDs in Railway for myself. So, and obviously I'm just one guy, so take the tier list with a grain of salt, obviously. But I do have a lot of experience with Railway. So we're gonna be going sinner by sinner. So we're gonna do all of Esong's IDs first, and then all of Faust's IDs second, whatever. The tiers, I'll explain really quickly. The tiers are not going to be in any particular order. So, units within the tier are not going to be ranked against each other. It's just going to be in the order that I rank them. So, the person in, the last person in, the top tier is not going to be probably not going to be any worse than the first person in top tier. It's just going to be how it lines up. So, to explain the actual tiers, mandatory, pretty self-explanatory. These are top of the meta units. You are taking them. If you're going for sub 80, 80-ish, sub 80, you're taking these. It's non-negotiable. And by proxy, if a unit is in mandatory, then all of their other IDs are going to be in don't bother, bottom tier, because obviously you can only bring one ID per sinner. So, you know, if one of their IDs ends up being mandatory, automatically invalidates all the other IDs. So, those are like the top two, or the top one and the bottom one. Besides like the top tier invalidating all the other ones, don't bother is just gonna be also like miscellaneous like garbage. Does not mean the IDs themselves are not good. Usually it does, but you know, don't bother is mostly reserved for things that aren't extremely viable in Railway, where damage is king. It's gonna be a common theme. Damage is going to be king over pretty much everything else. So, you know, any unit that doesn't do good damage is automatically probably going to be in don't bother unless their utility is very good. And then other top choices, this is kind of like, you know, it's very close to being mandatory, but there's like a couple things holding them back, and usually they're competing with other IDs from the same center. So you can't just take one, like if one of them isn't mandatory and then it invalidates the other ones automatically. So, you know, this is going to be basically my personal preference for what I like, and it'll change, you know, based on what type of player you are. That's what this tier is for. Worth considering. Depends on your personal preference. It's basically things that I know or I believe are pretty good, but I personally don't lean towards them. But they are worth considering for your gameplay, and I do recommend trying them, especially if you don't have some of the ones that I like to use. You can obviously use some of these, and they're pretty good, but you know, they're just not what I prefer. So that's just gonna explain all the tiers. We'll start with Isong. Isong has pretty good IDs actually. His base ID is my personal preference for what I like to bring. Just because if you're like grinding out some low turn runs, one of the main things that you're going to learn to absolutely loathe are sanity based stages. Anything that screws with your sanity sucks. Especially Toad is like the main offender. The Blubbering Toad, I think it's stage 3. That guy drains your sanity constantly, and base Isong's support passive helps you heal back some of your sanity, because if you're one of the worst feelings if you're grinding out, you know, and trying to get some good RNG, one of the worst feelings that you can get is, you know, the enemy is like sapping your sanity over and over again, and then you've played everything like to the best of your ability and you've got good skill rotation and everything, but then like randomly your guy just like is freaking out, and then he, you know, misses like 2 or 3 coins due to no fault of your own pretty much, and you just lose based on like random garbage, and it really sucks. So, you know, for this is like one of the only sanity, like mid-battle easy sanity regen, besides like, you know, winning clashes and all the standard stuff. This is like one of the only ways to consistently get sanity besides like clashing with people, because sometimes you don't want to clash with people. You know, sometimes some of your centers are just bad at clashing, so you don't really want to be taking clashes with them often. Or sometimes, you know, you want to damage tank for like whatever reason, you want to tank some attacks, so you're not going to be clashing with those either. So Isong's base center passive can actually really help, and this is what I personally prefer. I just bring normal Isong. If you want to use him in battle, it's not even that bad, honestly. If you were to bring him to use him in battle, I would pick one of the other two. So I'd put 7 Section and Blade Lineage, depending on your preference. All of these are pretty viable, to be honest. I just prefer to have the sanity regen myself, but you know, if you want to bring him into battle, you can, because especially 4th Match Flame, his 4th Match Flame is actually very spammable. The problem is it takes 5 Wrath, but you know, it's remediable, and it's a spammable AoE. It's kind of slept on because Isong is just kind of like slept on overall because he doesn't really have any outstanding like meta defining IDs yet. Hopefully that changes in the future, but his 4th Match Flame is actually pretty good. Just for spamming, it's actually Wrath / AoE. So it is quite good for things like K-Corp or, you know, Snakes on stage 10, the Slithering Inquisitor stage. So, you know, there is actually legitimate use for him. If I were to pick one of these two, I would probably take 7 Section, just because his, I mean, you know it, Molinet is just, like, really good. It's, like, extremely good, support for Pierce. It's basically Hexnail. It's just Hexnail on a skill 3, so, you know, it's pretty good. It's also one of the few, like, Blunt Sloth skills in the game, which hardly matters because his damage numbers are not very good. Offense level 32 is, like, pretty low, like, pretty middle to low, so he's not really doing much damage. I just don't like using him because he kind of feels bad to use. He just feels like he doesn't do much, compared to, you know, constantly having sanity regeneration every turn. His support passive is honestly pretty good, though. The only problem is its resonance. It's Gluttony Resonance, so it's not going to be consistent. But it is nice to have. And then, you know, Blade Lineage is probably my least preferable pick, but I've seen people use him. He is pretty decent, to be honest. Support passive is unfortunately pretty useless, but he does have a pretty solid offense level. 41 offense level is pretty solid, and his rolls are pretty good. And he doesn't really care about sanity either, because he, you know, this kind of goes for all the Blade Lineage IDs, I think, but they all kind of share a high base power and then low coin modifier. So, you know, even if they roll tails, they only lose, like, they lose very little in clashing power. So, you know, he can help for sure. And also Rat Slash, he's just pretty decent as a support DPS, especially again if you use 4th Match Flame, you weave some of those in there. He can actually help fuel it with his skill 2, which you're going to be using all the time pretty much. So he mainly generates Wrath, because you're not really using his skill 1, and his skill 3 doesn't show up very often. So you're mainly generating Wrath with him, which is very nice. So he can help self-fuel 4th Match Flame. It's pretty good, but if I were to pick, I'd probably pick, you know, Hexnail at home over him, I think. But, you know, my personal pick is obviously, I don't like having that much RNG on my rolls. I think it's just really annoying. So yeah. Next is Faust. We already know. Don't even, yeah. I don't really need to say much about this one. You're taking the Gripper. You're taking Cromer, and you're going to like it. Whether or not you like Faust, it's just it's just a compromise we have to make. The sad thing is, the Lobotomy Corp Faust is actually not even bad in Railway, but Gripper is just so much better that it doesn't really matter. Like, you're going to take Gripper if you're doing low turn. You know, oh yeah, obviously it is possible to do low turn with pretty much whatever you want. It's going to be a hell of a lot harder if you don't follow, like, the meta, but, you know, you can bring LobCorp and have, you know, I'm not saying you can't have success with these. I'm just saying, you know, this is just, like, it's just the meta, you know? You can have success with LobCorp. I'm not saying it's impossible to get, like, sub 80 with LobCorp instead of Gripper, but, like, you know what I mean. You don't even need me to explain it, but I'll just go over it really quickly. Very generous speed range. It's 4 to 7 instead of like 3 to 7, so she actually does have solid speed. You know, her passive is, you know, it exists. Honestly, it's like it almost never gets activated, but it is, if it does, again, free sanity. You love to see free sanity, but unfortunately, yeah, it doesn't get activated often because Lust is just not really in the cards for most stages. 3 Lust is kind of annoying to get. Her skill 1 is pretty trash. You know, unfortunately, Bleed is just not super good in Railway, in low turn Railway. It's just better to pretty much just do damage. So, you know, we don't really care about Nails too much. It is free damage, but it's just, she's not there for damage. You know what she's there for. It's Gaze, because Gaze is just stupid. They also apparently bug fixed the Paralyze very recently. I didn't even know this skill had Paralyze on it, and I was playing like with her after the bug fix, and I like still didn't really notice it. But I mean, it feels like something they just tacked on for fun, and I'm all for it. But like, you know, you could just pretend this doesn't exist. It doesn't even need to exist, but it's basically just Gaze. Her entire character is just Gaze, because Gaze is just so stupid. Unfortunately, Faust is just not very good at clashing. That's like her main weakness. Gripper Faust, anyway, is just not very good at clashing. Her skill 1 is like good for a skill 1, but we're talking about skill 1s here, so it's like not that good for clashing. Gripping is her best clash skill, and it's got like a max of 16, so it's like pretty fair. It's like pretty fair. She can win like most common clashes, but you know, once things get a little more intense, you're just gonna want to clash with someone else. And then her skill 3, in terms of clash power, is like absolutely miserable. It's got like max of 12, which is not good for a skill 3 for sure. But thankfully, her gripping, the skill 2 is essentially as strong as a skill 3 would be. So she basically has 2 skill 3s, which have like fair clash power. So, you know. But it is nice to have Pride Blunt, because, you know, it's kind of convenient to have on things like K-Corp. Just to have Blunt in general is pretty nice to have. Her offense level, pretty good. It's like pretty good. But yeah, you know she's there. And then the other reason why Faust is like super meta is because of her egos, obviously. You know, representation emitter. You know what it does. Passive, super disgusting passive. It actually does help her clashing, and it helps her damage, but she's not there for damage. But it does help her clashing a little bit, which is nice. Very cheap. It helps self-fuel itself. Also, if you have Gripper, she can help fuel it. But I feel like people don't really notice, but it actually helps self-fuel itself because, you know, when you use a skill, like you'll get an ego resource for that skill the next turn, obviously. But it also counts for egos if you use egos. So because this is a pride ego, when you use this ego, you'll get 1 pride for using it because it's a pride skill. So even though it costs 2 gluttony and 4 pride to activate, it only ends up costing a net 2 gluttony and 3 pride. So it actually does kind of help fuel into itself, which is very helpful on stages like K-Corp, where you're going to be using it a lot. It does actually make a pretty big difference. But yeah, spammable AoE, which also heals a significant chunk of sanity for all allies. You love to see it. You know, Hex Nail, you already know this thing is like really good in pretty much only Railway, because all the other content is like, you know, way too squishy for this thing to shine. But Railway, this thing really shines. And then Fluid Sac is also fantastic. 5 target AoE, very cheap. You know, it doesn't actually do that much damage because, you know, offense level is pretty low. The highest, or the max roll you can get is like 24. So it doesn't actually do that much damage, but like heals the entire team for sanity and health. Like, you couldn't really ask for a better support ego, especially on a unit that also has the gripping. It also has Hex Nail. It also has Representation Emitter. Like, you know, you already know. I probably way over explained it, but you already understand. Next is Dawn. Similar situation. We just invalidate all her other stuff and then go to, you know, go to W Corp. Teleport. Like, I'll try and speed up the like, you already know why Dawn is so good. All right. Leap and rip space. For some reason, there's fragile on it. One thing to note, actually, that is important is she has 148 health, which for a DPS is actually pretty it's on the chunky side for a DPS unit, which is significant because when we're talking about support passives, some of them will target the unit with the highest health, and Don Quixote for a DPS usually has the highest health. So she'll get targeted with some of these support passives more often than others, and she'll get the bonus damage and whatnot from it. So it is actually important to point out that she has 148 base health. I believe Faust has 134 and Rabbit has 134. So she'll have a comfortable edge over the other people, and usually she'll get targeted. Unfortunately, your speed is pretty low, but, you know, who cares? But yeah, that is one thing that people seem to overlook, but it does actually end up mattering quite a bit, so it is nice to have. And then, you know, Teledon is actually very good for helping your allies charge up and whatnot. You already know. You don't need me to tell you. So we'll just move on from there. Ryoshu. Ryoshu is interesting. Because she actually has 3 pretty viable options. You're not going to be using her base form, in all likelihood, because all 3 of her other options are just better than her base form. I'd say 7 section Ryoshu, it's not really, it is good. Do not get me wrong, it is good. 7 section Ryoshu is actually very good. Extremely slept on. Unfortunately, her support passive is like not useful, but but like her skill 3 is extremely broken. So, you know, yeah, we're basically going to be using her just for her skill 3. Similarly to Isang, she like 7 section Isang, she is a support unit, but slash fragility is like super good. So, you know, I do think she's good. Plus her ego, 4th match flame especially does big numbers, but that can go for all the Ryoshu IDs. So this is you know, based on personal preference. I personally would not actually recommend bringing Kurakumo Ryoshu, because, I mean, don't get me wrong, she is good. Like, you know what, I could probably bump her up to here, but you know, I personally do not, I don't really personally enjoy bringing her, because her damage numbers are pretty low, and again, her support is like, her support is pretty good, especially for bleed, but again, like, I'm not really super partial to bleed in Railway, so when she does give a lot of bleed, but I just personally don't think it's really worth bringing her over 7 section, but you can make the choice on either of these. Her damage numbers, again, are pretty low. And her debuffs, that people seem to overlook her debuffs a lot, actually. Her skill 2 inflicting 2 damage down, and then her skill 3 inflicting 3 offense level down is actually pretty good, because if she can go first, which is admittedly not like super often, because her speed range is like pretty average, like pretty average to like slightly below average. Her speed range is about average, but if she can manage to go before like some other people, like Don Quixote is the same speed range, so if she can go before Don, you can set up some tanking strategies with these. It is actually pretty decent. She can help your teammates clash and take less damage, which does actually matter. Like, just not taking damage over time, chip damage, matters quite a bit. So, you know, she does help, but damage is king in low turn when you're just constantly racing to kill the enemies as fast as possible. It doesn't really favor, you know, bleed as much, because, you know, it's more of a slower, methodical playstyle where you're kind of controlling the enemies, you know, procedurally stacking your bleed up over time. You know, things like nails help to speed it up a little bit, but if you're doing a nail comp, you're not doing very much upfront damage, so it's like it kind of has its own problems that I don't really like. So, you know, I'll leave her there though, so it doesn't look so when people look at my tier list, it doesn't look super troll. But Chef, I recently just did a run with Chef. And she is extremely good. I might even say she's like mandatory, but it's a little too soon to tell. She's only been out for like a week, and I've only done one low turn run with her. But that low turn run was like extremely good. So you know what? I'll put her in top tier. Honestly, I'll put her in top tier. Which logically should mean that these two should go into Don't Bother, to be honest. But I'll put 7 Section here because she is pretty good. But I'll put KK. I'll put KK in Don't Bother. But Chef is absurdly good. For normal content, you know, I can see why some people you can choose between KK or Chef for normal content. It's personal preference. Chef is just a balls to the wall, absolute damage monster. She is like, her entire kit basically revolves around forgoing pretty much all utility at all and just doing as much damage as possible, which for Railway is obviously like exactly what we want. Her skill 1, like, none of these debuffs matter, by the way. Except for the one bind does actually come up. It is nice because her skill 2 ingredient hunt actually does get used very often because it's just like so good. It has the best like clashing power in a skill 2 like in the game pretty much, just because for some reason its coin values are super high. You wouldn't at first glance you wouldn't think that the base power 3 matters, but it kind of actually does. Because if you roll tails on one of the coins, it immediately loses a lot of clashing power, but, you know, if you're doing low turns and resetting and whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of annoying when it happens. But, you know, her skill 2 is absolutely a beast, and then her skill 3 is absolutely a beast. Like, again, her utility is, like, pretty mid to poor. Like, it feels like most of it they just kind of dumped onto her just, like, for fun, just to see how many, like, different status effects they could have her inflict. But none of the status effects are super good. Like, people who say that she supports bleed are pretty much coping. You know, Appetite is, like, a non-existent buff, pretty much. Again, healing down, like, doesn't matter, for content in line 1. So it's basically just the one bind as her only utility, which does actually help a bit for mitigating speed RNG. But yeah, she's basically just full damage, and we love full damage. She absolutely cooks on some stages. She can help you reduce your turn count on Blubbering Toad. She can help you reduce your turn count on KQE, the robot. I think it was stage 6, the robot. She can help you kill Alleyway Watchdog, kill Headless Ichthys. She is just disgusting. It's literally just because of her skill 3. Just does an insane amount of damage. It does more than nuker egos. Like this skill does more than like Ardor Blossom Star. It does more than like Ryoshu's 4th Match Flame. Like the big like nuke button egos. It does more than like Ebony Stem. Sometimes it depends on the enemies, but you know, this thing is just on its own pretty much like run defining for certain stages where you're just erasing, especially on like abnormalities, single abnormalities where you're just burning them down. You can get insane numbers with her, so I'll put her in top tier, honestly. She's extremely good. Next is Mersault. Mersault, I use his base. Hear me out. Grosshammer is like the only other reasonable option, by the way. These two like don't exist. All right, don't try and don't cope and say that these are like useful. I at one point in my life I was like, you know, maybe Liu Mersault could be good. But the more that I thought about it and the more that I played, the more I realized that like base Mersault is just like the best one for Railway, for optimized Railway. And the reason why is just because of the way that it ends up playing out. Like, we all know Mersault is a defensive-oriented Sinner. So, his game plan is to control what the enemies can do, limit their movement, limit their damage, and just limit what actions they can take so the rest of your team can succeed. Which is, you know, it's a noble cause, and it's a good game plan on story missions, like, you know, Story Chromer and, like, you know, the big story missions. But the problem is, if you're doing optimized Railway, he's essentially like a dead weight. Like, you would, if you were to bring 5 people and one of them is Mersault, you're basically running 4 people doing damage, and then the last one, you know, could have been another Don Quixote slot so you could spam rip space more. You know, so just the way it ends up playing out in Railway is not super nice to him. So he's going to be on the bench for the most part. And when he's on the bench, he has an absurdly good, he has like a really, really good support passive, where one ally with the highest max HP, so one ally who's named, you know, W Corp Don Quixote takes minus 10% damage from enemy attacks. So just pretty much that's like his 90% of his usage is going to be just here, making your Sinners take less damage over time, like chip damage. And again, chip damage is super important to mitigate, because if you're bringing like the meta units for pretty much like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 stages in a row without benching them, they don't get the chance to bench heal. So eventually the chip damage is going to wear down over time, and then if you get it like chipped down enough, eventually your Sinners will be close to, like, you'll start a stage and, you know, Don Quixote or something will be very close to staggering. Like, she could get sniffled on and then stagger and just ruin your run, and it's like super, super annoying. So, you know, and she's never going to be bench healed because you're bringing her like every stage. So, you know, sustain and mitigation of chip damage is super, super important. That's also one thing I forgot to mention about Chef. Her support passive is pretty good. It'll only go off like 2 or 3 times maximum during a Railway run, to be honest. Like 3 or 4 maybe. But 15 health is like, 15 health is pretty good. For free, just for free. And like we're talking about a unit that's useful. Like, we're talking about a unit that is good, like really good, and they have a good support passive. So, you know, it's just a win-win for everyone involved, pretty much. So, yeah, most of the time you're going to be using Mersault on the bench. So, obviously his ID with the best support passive is going to be the best. But, if you are bringing Mersault into a stage, like for example, the one that comes to mind is like, what was it, N-Corp? I think it was like stage 4, is N-Corp. You could consider bringing him for Pursuance, Overclock Pursuance spam. Pursuance, we all know it's like super good. It does heal all of your allies like a ridiculous amount. And it also gives you like a stupid amount of damage, and it deals a stupid amount of damage. But the thing about that is, if you're spamming Pursuance on like for like blunt fatal enemies, it doesn't matter like which Mersault you bring, because Pursuance, you know, has its own offense level and whatever. The only thing that any of the IDs change is like your speed range. So, you know, if you're not using any of his skills because you're spamming Pursuance, then it doesn't really matter which ID you bring. So, if you're going to bring any of them, just bring the one with the best support passive. And then, you know, if you do choose to bring him into a stage to use Pursuance, then it doesn't matter what skills they actually have. So, I like bringing base. You could consider bringing Grosshammer, but, I mean, his support passive is kind of worse because it's on Resonance instead of just permanently on. And then his damage is kind of mid, so I just don't really like him. I used to use him more, but ever since I switched to base Mersault, I kind of fell off with this guy. But you know, it's your choice. Then we have Hong Lu. He's a weird one because he has two like meta-defining IDs. And then, you know, unfortunately, Hong Lu is just, like, not good. Well, he's not bad, but he's just, like, in Railway, he's just not as good as these two, obviously. It's a very tough race. I used to think that KK was a step above Ting Tang. Like, I used to think it was kind of, like, here, but, the more that I've, like, played Railway, and the more that I've like learned about how the fights end up playing out, and like really deeply learn like the mechanics of every fight, they do end up being pretty even, honestly. They do have their strengths and weaknesses. Kurakumo is basically just Cloud Cutter, we all know it, and Cloud Cutter is extremely good on certain stages because things like Alleyway Watchdog and K-Corp just absolutely fold to this skill. And then, you know, he's super helpful on, like, Chromer. So, you know, he's really, really good. His support passive is, like, pretty bad, to be honest, because you're not really bleeding people in Railway. And one thing that people don't really talk about a lot is his clashing power is, like, absolutely awful. For pretty much across the board, his clashing power is bad. He has, you know, an average skill 1, 10 base power total, or 10 power total, clash power, so, like, not anything special. Cloud Cutter, you know, to make it even remotely a smidge balanced, does not clash with the 4 coins, so it has, like, medium-ish to, like, low-ish clash power, so, you know, whatever. And then Cloud Burst is, like, again, it's the same setup as Execution, Gripper's skill 3, so, you know, not good clash power across the board. So he's basically just Cloud Cutter. We all knew it already, didn't need to say it, but Cloud Cutter is damn good on, like, stages 1, stage, what was it? Stage 1, stage, you could use him on, like, stage 10. I don't really like using him because now that Chef is in the game, I don't really enjoy using him too much, on stage 10 because Chef just does a better job. I'll, restart the, there we go. No, and I'll put this on the, there we go. Alright. I don't really enjoy using him on stage 10 because Chef exists now, but, you know, it's definitely an option. But Ting Tang, I've been warming up a lot to Ting Tang. I used to think, like, you know, again, I used to think they were kind of like this, but Ting-Tang I think is pretty good. Ting-Tang is also essentially just his skill 2, but Piercing Lust is very, very good to have on stages like Blubbering Toad, stage 3, and then Robot, KQE. He is just very, very nice to have. KQE is stage 6, I believe. He can like, having Ting-Tang on your team enables you to drop some turns. Like, you can, if you don't have Ting-Tang, you can't do Robot in 4 turns, as far as I'm aware. If you do have Ting-Tang, it allows you to 4-turn Robot. If you do have Ting-Tang, it doesn't allow you, but it greatly increases your odds of, you know, getting a 4-turn Blubbering Toad. It greatly aids you in getting a 1-turn Headless Ichthys. So having him does cut turns, you know. And one thing that people don't really talk about, that I feel like really deserves to be talked about, is his support passive is broken. This thing is insane. Like, I don't know why people don't talk about this more. Unfortunately, it's like I'm not 100% sure how it judges which ally gets the passive when everyone's at 45 or like even sanity. But, yeah, this thing is, like, stupid good, for some reason. So, you know, he's basically just his skill 2. On early stages, like stage 2, Mutilate can do numbers on stage 2 because they're fatal to Gluttony, I believe. So, you know, Mutilate does have its moments, and also it does, again, after the sanity change, it does outclash everything. Pretty much. There's no skill in the game that can outclash Mutilate, just off the top of my head. You know, so this thing is like an absolute monster. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that much damage, but, if you're just trying to win a clash, this thing is, like, nice to keep in the back pocket. But it's mostly just Shank pulling all the weight. And then his combat passive is pretty decent. It helps you, like, not drop sanity for things like Mutilate, but, you know, you're not really paying attention to this thing. So, you know, Ting-Tang has warmed up to me significantly, recently. He's had quite the glow up. And, also, shout out to Land of Illusion. This thing is really, really good, for ego spamming. Like, just AoE blunt ego spamming on, like, stage 9, the K-Corp stage, is, like, it's super good, because you kind of just stack up Gloom over time based on, you know, using Don Quixote Leap, like, every single stage, so you just kind of, like, accrue Gloom over time, and you can spend, like, a ton of it just spamming on some of those stages, so he's just good to have. The one thing that I really would think about, though, when choosing between KK or Ting-Tang is your Pride generation, because Pride is already a pretty tough resource to generate. There's not many good, there's not many good skills that also generate Pride. It's, like, pretty much just execution, and then, there was another, like, Pride skill 3 that's, like, pretty good. Oh, yeah, Suppression, for LCCB Ishmael. Those are, like, the only good, like, Pride skills that I can think of off the top of my head that aren't Cloud Cutter. So, your Pride generation, if you don't choose Kurakumo, is going to be pretty bad. And you will be starving, so you won't be able to use things like Ebony Stem, for help on, like, stage 2, or Headless Ichthys. What was that one? Like, I think Ichthys was stage 7. So you do have to watch out for that, for sure. But overall, I think they're both viable. It's just that, I think I like Kurakumo more, just because I think he might save more turns overall, but it's hard to say because Ting-Tang's combat passive, or his support passive rather, is, like, so good, compared to Kurakumo's. So, you know, either one, it's your choice, but they're both, you're taking one of them. You will take one of them. essentially. So, you know, just pay attention to your pride if you take Ting Tang, because that's like a real big issue. Moving on, Heathcliff. Don't even... We already know. Rabbit is just like, he's just there. So, we already know Rabbit's just like stupid good. You just bring him. I don't even want to talk about him, bro. I love using him. Like, he's meta, but I love using him. He's just so fun to use. His support passive is actually Omega Slept On, by the way. This thing is like really good. Because it usually if Don Quixote or Faust is going first, they'll just get like free damage. The only issue is you need to bench Rabbit for it, so like it's not gonna go off pretty much ever. But you know, if you do end up benching Rabbit, like there are stages where you can bench Rabbit, because he's just not super good. Like K-Corp again comes to mind, where you know Rabbit might not be super good to bring, so you know you can bench him, and the passive does give you a little bit of extra damage, but you know nothing too crazy, but it's definitely not useless. It's not like Kurakumo passive. It's like it's not useless. His skills, again, I feel like people still don't realize that his skills get way better at 6+ speed. So just, you know, remember to set up with Body Bag. If you're using Rabbit, you need to set up with Body Bag, especially for Quick Suppression, because it doubles the coin power on Quick Suppression. It essentially doubles your damage. And Teleheath is actually kind of slept on. It's another spammable AoE, and it's really good, especially on stage 8, the Nothing There Inquisitors. There's 3 enemies, and it hits all 3 of them. Bam. So, you know, this thing is actually kind of a monster there, which is pretty good. But you don't need to use it. You don't need to up-tie it, and you don't need to use it. I've gotten 5 turns on it without using Teleheath, just because I want to save Lust and Wrath sometimes. So, you know, it is spammable, but it depends on your team comp what you're generating. Like if you're running Ting Tang, you know, you'll have more Lust, but if you're running Kurakumo, you'll have less Lust. So, you know, it's whatever. But, you know, don't sleep on it, for sure. Moving on. Ishmael, you're just not using base, for sure. And then I don't really like She Section. I'll get into that on its own, but you can choose either one of these, and they're both pretty good. I think personally I lean more towards Reindeer, just my personal preference. There is success with both. There's about equal levels of success with both, though. This is truly personal preference. You can take whichever one of these you want. But the setup for LCCB is a little bit more intricate, because her speed range is pretty low. It's like very low. So, you know, obviously her entire character essentially revolves around Suppress's last coin, which inflicts 5 fragile, 50% extra damage. It's stupid broken skill, but it's balanced out by her having a terrible speed range, so she's pretty much going last like most of the time, which means that there's not going to be many people who on your squad who can generally benefit from the fragile, because she's going to apply it after everyone else is already attacked. So the setup for her is kind of annoying, because you have to reset a lot for her speed RNG so she can go before things like Rabbit. Like, if she has a max range of 6, and Rabbit, like, bare minimum, if you're resetting for, like, a turn 1, for example, you want Rabbit with Quick Suppression, bare minimum needs a 6, and he has, like, max of 7. So you're going for a 6 or a 7 on him, and you're going a max roll on LCCB, and then you have to play the 50-50, because if they're tied speed, which they have to be in order for the setup to work, they need to be tied speed because her max is 6. So Rabbit needs to roll exactly a 6. She needs to roll max. And then the 50-50, she needs to go first before him so she can apply the fragile with her skill 3. It's like, it's really annoying. I don't really fuck with it. But it is, like, when it works, boy does it work. Like, holy. So, you know, I'm not going to write her off just because it's annoying to use her. Because she is definitely good. There's no doubt about it, as long as you can make her work. I prefer Reindeer over her. Reindeer's just a little easier to use. She benefits a lot from Teledon, because Teledon, again, gives your allies charge, which includes Reindeer. So Reindeer will be able to get charge, because normally, without Teledon, Reindeer takes 3 turns to charge. Because if you use, like, 2 Flaying Surge, you're at 10 charge, but it takes 2 turns, so you'll be at 8 charge, because you'll lose 1 each turn. So, you'll use 2 Flaying Surge, be at 10 charge, lose 2, because you spent 2 turns charging. And then you have to use, like, Mind Strike to get the last charge, so you can use Mind Whip. And that takes 4 turns to set up. But, if you have Teledon, Teledon can give her just that little bit of charge to pop off 1 turn earlier with Mind Whip, which does make a big, big difference. And the more I play with Reindeer, the more I do appreciate having a blunt nuke on the team. Because blunt nuking is, like, very, very rare to have. She's, like, the only notable blunt nuker. So, you know, besides, like, AoE spamming. But sometimes, you know, if you're trying to, like, nuke a single target, like, for example, we're talking, like, Guido, both on the N-Corp stage and on the final stage, the possessed Guido, both of those you want like a single target blunt nuker, and there's no good, like, blunt nukers besides Reindeer. So, you know, I do enjoy having Reindeer, and also her support passive actually exists. It's not super good, but, you know, at least it does something. So, you know, sometimes you might get a little bit of damage out of it, but, you know, at least it's somewhat useful. Like, if Heathcliff uses, like, Body Bag or something, or, like, if you're using Fluid Sac or something, you know, it can give you some extra damage. So, I prefer Reindeer over LCCB, because she's just easier to use, and you get good results with her as long as you're careful with your planning, with her. So, I prefer her. The reason I don't like she section, I've leaned more against her over time, because obviously her skill 2 is, like, turbo broken. It's Cloud Cutter, but better. And Cloud Cutter is already so good that it defines an entire character. This skill is Cloud Cutter, but better. The problem is she has to be at less than 50%. And that obviously comes with a lot of downsides. The setup for her is slow, I've found. I haven't really found a very quick way to set her up without, like, taking, like, an absurd amount of extra turns on like, stage 1 and 2 to set her up. So, you know, people who use she section, like, let me know what stage you use to set her up, bro. Because, like, I literally don't know. I find myself, like, going, like, 10 or 11 turns, or, like, 10 to 12 turns total on the first 2 stages, just trying to set her up correctly sometimes. So, you know, it's, like, really annoying to set her up. And you also have to take her every stage, which is not a bad thing. It's just a little bit of inconvenience, but, like, you know, you're taking Dawn every stage, and no one complains about that. You're taking Rabbit every stage, no one complains about that. So, I mean, you know, you're taking Cloud Cutter on steroids every stage, I'm not complaining. But, I think it's kind of annoying to set her up. And then also, if you're using Faust and you're using, like, Fluid Sac, it'll heal her, which is super annoying. You know what, I'm gonna skip over all of the shopkeeper variants and just go back to the beginning. But if you're using Fluid Sac, it'll heal her for like an annoying amount, and then, you know, Gregor's support passive, we'll get into that, also heals her. So you're constantly have to keep managing her over time, which is just like, it's a chore, honestly. So if you can make her work, go for it, honestly. But you know, not for me, personally, just not for me. Next is Rhodia. Her support passive is super, like, I'm tempted to put her into mandatory, like, just because you're never using her, for the record. People who say that you can use her like base ego and like do some decent damage on like K-Corp, bro, they are coping, bro. Don't use, like, straight up, I'm telling you right now, bro, don't use her. If you're doing like low turn, just use base, because her support passive, this is the main reason why we care about Dawn's max health being high, because W Dawn has more health than all of the people that you're generally going to be bringing with her. She has more health than Rabbit, she has more health than Gripper, and she has more health than Chef Ryoshu. So she's always going to be benefiting from the Gambler passive. I believe Reindeer actually out healths her. Yeah, Reindeer has 160. So if you're bringing Reindeer, boo-hoo, like, Mind Whip is going to be getting the plus 20 instead, plus 20%. But like, base Rhodia is like despicably good just because of this. You know, she had the most insane support passive glow up after that patch. So I'm genuinely tempted to put her into mandatory. She is so good. Just don't use her. Simple as that. Which means that, you know, I'm putting, you know, Mittelhammer, you can go into worth considering, but base Rhodia is like for me, it's like meta defining. Like, if you just think about it, you're going to be doing more damage with her support passive over the course of the entire railway than you are from Mittelhammer using her damaging skills on stages. There's only like 2 or 3 stages you would even want to use Mittelhammer anyway. I feel like it would be like stage 1 and then like stage 4 maybe, and then like, I don't even know, like stage 9 because of base ego, which it's decent, but like, why are, like, I don't want to use Rhodia. Like, I don't know, like, she's only gonna be brought on like 3 stages maybe, and you know, she'll do like fair damage, I guess, but compared to the amount of collective damage her support passive will do over the course of the entire railway, I feel like the numbers are like, the numbers just don't lie, you know. So this is where I would honestly put her in mandatory. That's where I would put her. She's like so good. Then we're going to Sinclair. I don't really like using Sinclair, to be honest. This is like where I would put his IDs, I think. I don't use Impending Day because it's just too slow to set up, from what I've found. I've tried it, but you have to go like pretty slowly in order to get Impending Day off on the first couple stages. You have to take like 10 or 11 turns on stage 1 and 2 combined to get Impending Day to get going, because 3 Wrath and 2 Lust is a challenge to generate early. I find there's only like, if you bring Ting Tang, you can use Shank to generate your Lust, and then if you're using like Blade Lineage Sinclair, he can generate the Wrath himself. So it's not like unreasonable, it's not outlandish, but like, I feel like it's just too slow for the amount that you get out of it. But it does help your start significantly. I will admit, it does help your start significantly if you can just get Impending Day to go off like twice, collect it like 2 or 3 times in the first like 2 stages combined. Like, it helps your start extremely well, especially if you can generate like Wrath or you can generate pride. Like those two sins are like extremely annoying to generate. So, you know, there's a case to be made, but again, I feel like in my personal experience, the setup is just too slow to justify using them. So just use, I always just stick to Mariachi because his support passive is like just free damage. Again, just we just love free damage. You never use him, but you know, he just gets free damage for being brought along for the ride, and we love to see it. So, you know, yeah, I mean, if you're okay with taking like 10 or 11 turns on the first two stages, or like 10 to 12 turns on the first two stages, to get like your ego up, I guess, what would it be? It would be like 7 and 4 turns, I guess. 7 turns stage 1 and 4 turns stage 2 about. So it would be like you know, 10 to 11 to like 6 or 4, 7 and 4, 6 and 4 around to set it up for impending day. To get it to go off like 2 or 3 times. So, you know, if you're okay with taking a 10 to 11 turn first 2 stages, then sure. But if you don't want to, and you like to go for the 9 turn stage 1 and 2 like I do, then, you know, just bring Mariachi. Otis, you know, 7 section is like clearly the best one. And then we'll put these two down here, obviously. I don't even know if like default Otis should go in bottom tier. It could, like, the thing is, she's not bad, like, genuinely, but 7 section is like a strict upgrade, like, overall. So, you know, you could bring her, though. She's genuinely not bad. Otis kind of just generally stays on the bench for the most part. She only comes out like on 2 or 3 stages. You know, base Otis actually is pretty useful. Her skill 2 is pretty good. Her skill 1 is pretty good. And her skill 3 is basically like Mutilate at home. So it's decent. But unfortunately, her support passive is completely worthless in Railway because all the enemies are locked to 0 sanity. So there's never any enemies below 0 sanity. So her support passive is completely useless. And again, your Otis is going to be on the bench most of the time. Except for a few select stages. So we're basically only looking at 7 section. And 7 section is pretty damn good. Again, she is mostly used for the start of the run, where you have low sanity. Like stage 1, she's really good because her clashing power baseline is very, very good. Even on low sanity, that's where she shines because she reduces enemy clash power. So you're basically on an even playing field, or favored. So she on low sanity runs at the start of the run, she's very, very helpful to have. So stage 1, you would bring her. Stage 2, if you're on Ebony Stem strat, which is what I do, you would bring her again. And she's very good on stage 2 as well. And then she can help on Headless Ichthys if you're doing a 1-turn strat on Headless Ichthys, Ebony Stem. Like, past the first stage, she's basically, her entire identity is just Ebony Stem. You would bring Ebony Stem for, like, Headless Ichthys, and you would bring Ebony Stem for, like, what is it, stage 11? The Headless Ichthys and Watchdog. Stage 11, you'd bring Ebony Stem for the 2-turn. So, you know, she's basically just Ebony Stem, and beyond that, she helps you get over that stage 1 hump, and her support passive is absurdly good. It's just free damage, and we love free damage. So, you know, again, most of the time, she's going to be on the bench, except for when you pull her out for Ebony Stem, occasionally. So, you know, her having a support passive as 7 section is better than having no support passive as default. So, honestly, I mean, she's not, like, meta-defining. She's not, like, mandatory to have, but she's, like, really good. is she better than Rhodia? Like, yeah, no, she definitely is, because Ebony Stem is that good, I think. That you kind of do, like, need to, Ebony Stem is really, really good for cutting turns. But the thing is, base Otis can do the same thing. But, like, she is basically, like, meta on... She is meta on some stages. Again, like, Headless Ichthys, she's super meta. You know, stage 2, she's super meta. Stage 11, she's super meta. Stage 1, she's very helpful. So she does... Her having 7 section does help over base Otis, because she helps fuel the Ebony Stem better than base Otis does. And she also helps fuel Legger Domain. So, you know, I'd say she's honestly pretty mandatory. And then, you know, base Otis can go and don't bother then, I suppose. But, you know, whatever. I mean, you can use her anyway. And then lastly, we have Gregor. We're going to be putting Gregor in here, and then we can put these two up here. People legitimately sleep on Liu Gregor. I'll get into him in a little bit. But, you know, G-Corp, everyone knows G-Corp is super good. Like I was saying before with She Ishmael, you know, I touched on it a little bit. G-Corp is just super, super good, because he gives you so much health over the course of the run just for being on the bench. 90% of the time, Gregor is going to be on the bench. He is good. Don't get me wrong, he is good, but on most stages, including him, does not cut turns because of the opportunity cost of, you know, not having a second slot on, like, Don Quixote versus, you know, bringing Gregor. You know, it just barely doesn't justify him being on your team most of the time. There are, like, 1 or 2 stages that you do want to bring him on. But 90% of the time, he's going to be on the bench, giving you insane healing value to heal off some of that chip damage on your damage dealers. You know, especially keeping people topped off, like Don Quixote, making sure she's topped off so she can be the target of Rhodia's support passive. So, you know, he's mostly pretty good. Fun fact, actually, he actually has about the same clashing power as 7 section Otis. Even including her ability on all of her skills to reduce the clash power by 2. He actually has, like, the very, very similar, almost identical clashing power to her, just because the offense level, if you look at all of Otis's offense level, it's 32. If you look at G Gregor, it's 41. So he has 9 more offense level than her, which translates to about 1 to 2 extra clashing power. So he actually has the same clash power as 7 section Otis. And 7 section Otis is obviously, you know, known for having good clash power. She's like one of the best clashes in the game. Essentially, that's like her main gimmick. So, you know, fun fact, but it's not going to make you bring Gregor most of the time anyway. You're going to want him on the bench. The only time you would want to bring him is obviously for Legger Domain spam. Everyone knows the strategy. You just use it over and over again. It helps fuel itself because it's gluttony and requires gluttony. So it helps fuel itself. But if you're Legger Domain spamming, similarly to Mersault, it doesn't matter. It does not matter if you're using ego spamming. It doesn't matter what ID you use. You know, it doesn't matter what ID you use because what's it called? If you're just using an ego over and over, you're not using any of the ID skills. So, you know, if you're Legger Domain spamming on like stage 4 or on stage 9, you know, you don't care which Gregor you bring. So I would prefer to bring G-Corp just because it gives you a little more safety. But people genuinely sleep on Liu Gregor. if you look at Leo Gregor's support passive, this thing is a monster. Alright? And I don't see enough people talk about it, frankly. Ally with the lowest speed deals 30% damage with their third and subsequent coins. Most of the time, the ally with the lowest speed is going to be W Dawn, because her speed range is 3 to 6, which is like slightly below average. So she's usually going to be the slowest. Third and subsequent coins, if that rings any bells, you know, third and subsequent coins, this thing has 5 coins. So 3 of those coins are going to be dealing plus 30% damage. So that's an extra plus 90% collective damage with the last 3 coins of Rip Space if she's going last. So, you know, it's just completely disgusting, honestly. And also, like, again, if you're using Chef, she has the same speed range as W Dawn. So if you're using the Cookening, you know, the latter half of the skill will deal an extra like 60% collective damage. So he is genuinely good. People just sleep on him because G. Gregor is like extremely helpful and extremely safe. You know, he's just very nice to bring because, again, if your Rabbit and your Dawn are getting chipped down over the course of numerous stages, you know, he does help you significantly by healing off a lot of that damage. This is essentially where the tier list is. I'm just gonna look over everything one more time. Let's see if I would change anything. Like, base Rhodia and 7-section Otis, I think, could probably go into other top choices. They're not like top of the meta, for sure. I think they could move down, probably. Yeah. And then let's just reorganize a little bit here. And then I suppose we can move this Otis up, but I mean, again, you would always use 7-section if you had her, I think. So yeah, I think this is kind of where I'm at on this. Yeah. So this is the finished list. Final thoughts. Basically you have the trifecta up here. Chef is a new addition, so I don't have that much testing on her. It's just like I played like one railway run with her, but she was extremely good. Like, I can see her cutting turns on certain stages that otherwise wouldn't be possible. Like, she makes the one turn on Headless Ichthys possible pretty much without Ting Tang, so it opens up the possibility of one turning Ichthys with Kurakumo. So you don't have to bring Ting Tang, so you can cut turns on K-Corp and stuff like that with Kurakumo instead. Like, I could see possibilities like that. So I'll leave her in top tier, I think. Yeah, I think this is about it. Just doing one final check here. Yeah. Just make sure. I feel like people are going to be upset that I put Kurakumo in bottom tier, but you know, it's okay. So yeah, that's about all I got. Thanks for watching. If you disagree, feel free to tell me. Honestly, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. because I'm always open to new tech. I just love Railway, dude. It's so fun. But yeah, peace and good night.